Welcome and hello to Amplitude Digital and our special Search Engine Journal Director's Cut edition. Today I have with me Jeff Ferguson, partner and head of production here at Amplitude. Hello, Jeff.
Hello.
Good to see you.
You as well.
In addition to running our SEO team here, Jeff is a sought-after speaker at digital conferences, and he's an adjunct professor at UCLA teaching tomorrow's digital leaders. Now, Jeff, you've been writing this series of articles for the Search Engine Journal that are so-called kind of tipping all the sacred cows of SEO. In the process, kind of stirring the pot a little bit here in the SEO community. And this latest article you wrote, it's called Google Ranks Web Pages, Not Websites. It's puncturing something very important here. It's kind of a general misunderstanding that leads to a lot of expensive and misguided SEO work. Straight up, does a Google ranking signal exist based on the collective behavior of an entire website?
The answer is no, right? When you look at it from a straight across the board, that there's a universal metric that is used for all pages that takes into account the domain. That just doesn't exist, right? And that's something that it's not me just saying this. It's something Google has specifically said. Not only and specifically, you can refer to something like what's called a domain authority that Moz uses, but there's other SEO tools that have similar type tools that look at things from like the domain level or the entire website level of types things, and
Sure.
On a holistic view, I guess, is the best way to do that. And that's kind of what the article's about, was this idea that there is nothing like that that's universal for each and every website that has its own like extra added score for being a very good website. Like that kind of stuff doesn't exist, right? And the reason I'm being careful is because as usual, there's exceptions to every rule, but they are exceptions, and it kind of proves my point. There are certainly instances where for things like Penguin and Panda and certain other signals that have, other algorithms or other over the years that use things, and sometimes they can look at big collections of pages, or everything in a given folder, or even the entire like domain, but it's a sometimes kind of thing, right? It's not necessarily one of those things where like there's this hovering score that you have to contend with, like domain authority speaks to, right? It's more along the lines of like, hey, we're trying to make our minds up about something that you're doing on a couple of pages here, so we're going to look at the rest of the site here to kind of see if we're getting the right idea about who you are as a website, right? Or who you are as a page, or whatever it is. And that's kind of where it comes in. And that makes all the difference in the world, right? As far as in it. And sometimes people will just say, oh, it's the semantics, or you're splitting hairs. And I goes, I'm really not, right? It's because I think that little difference makes all the difference in the world for certain things. It's the idea of, if there was such a thing as a domain authority or a domain level event that was always used for something, it's something that you could actually technically measure. It's something that maybe you had the possibility of replicating, and it also had something that you had the possibility of optimizing for. Like you could look at it from that point of view, right? But it's not there, right? And the whole point of this thing was the idea that in reality, websites are a collection of pages, as a lot of people love to, a lot of people responded to me after this article came out. It goes, hey, big deal, websites are made of web pages, and what's the point here? I think, but the idea is that each one of those little web pages is its own little microcosm, its own little world of code and inbound links and content and things like that has to contend for itself. The website itself is not propping you up, right? And while that page itself is certainly influenced by the outside world, and whether that outside world is other websites or that outside world is other pages on your website, that's a whole different thing than the website itself propping it up. That is the idea that, you still kind of have to be really good at being a page, right? And that's kind of what that whole concept is about. And I give some different examples of kind of like how that relates, but for the most part, like that's the real like pot stirrer for this idea, is that there are certainly people that believe that there has to be something greater, right? And I've talked about this in other articles, before this concept of emergence, which is the idea that things combining to be greater than the sum of their parts. That's
Yes.
kind of what that emergence concept is, and that certainly exists, right? There is that kind of force in the universe, and it's something that Google admits, and it says, yeah, we definitely have these kind of things to it. But I think what ended up happening is that in certain SEOs, and especially SEO tool companies or other people that love to look at the statistics and things like that, they misinterpreted that emergence as like a holistic measurement for the website rather than something where it is more about like it's that page is functioning on its own as a collection of things that actually are more than the sum of its parts. And I think that's where it gets to it. And again, it can get really confusing. Because there's all types of things happening, right? And people will do things where they go, hey, look, we had this content that was on one website, and then we bought another domain and we moved it over that domain that was for a bigger company or whatever it is, and now that content's doing a lot better. So clearly the domain means that. It goes, does it? Or does it mean that like that other domain, like all the pages on there are load faster or are more mobile friendly, or that the main homepage for that one has more inbound links, and that authority is trickling down to those other pages better. Like there's so many things that can happen here. There's so many different parts of this puzzle. There's so many things in that collection of algorithms that Google ranks for this stuff, that trying to simplify it by saying like there must be a domain authority really oversimplifies it. I guess it's the best way to do it. And it's one of the things where like it's not really getting the point across. And frankly, I think is a bit of a punt, to basically claim that like, oh, there must be a domain authority that explains this all, when in reality, the real answer is less complex in the sense that it's about web pages and not websites, but that also means it's extraordinarily complex because there's so many factors at play from so many different sources. And I think sometimes people can't wrap their minds around that. They want to go to the easier answer for this kind of stuff, that there must be a magic button that's called domain authority that satisfies all this stuff. So that's where the article is kind of coming from.
It's really interesting. You did give a couple of examples in the article. One was about a stained glass website, and you also talked some about site speed. And when I heard those examples in the context of this, it definitely turned a light bulb on. It's like, well, that obviously makes sense that web pages, not websites.
Sure. So the stained glass windows one is interesting, and that actually came from a quote from somebody over at Ahrefs and which is another tool company, whatever, and their kind of just discussion about like how SEO works and how web pages works and things like that, and their kind of point is that like if you ran a website about stained glass, maybe we were a stained glass window maker or something along those lines, that every page on that website wouldn't necessarily be about stained glass windows specifically, right? It's something where there may be other ones where it's about, I don't know, installing stained glass windows, or choosing the artwork for stained glass windows, or things like that. So it's all these just slight variations for what it is. It isn't necessarily the keyword stained glass windows, right? And which is a good thing, because we really wouldn't want to live in a world that looked like that, right? That you'd have to create a new website to change the subject, right? Because that would get really weird, right? And where this kind of like proves itself out, and I've had a couple different people ask it over the years too. It was oddly enough, was it Jim Boykin of Website Ninjas, who does SEO in his own right. But I remember him asking that question before, which is that on the blog for Marketing Ninjas. On the blog for Marketing Ninjas, obviously there's a bunch of content that are about a variety of like digital marketing subjects, of course, but then every now and then you'd have one article that would be about something that he's passionate about. Maybe I think it was music or something along those lines, but it was something definitely off topic, right? And his original concern was like, is this one article that's about another topic hurting me in any way, right? And right. Is it, is it something where, is that pulling them off subject? Is it something where Google's going to look at that and say like, wait a minute, what the hell is this page? What the hell is this website about? That they're talking about both music and this, right? And it's because Google looks at web pages and not websites, right? That it doesn't hurt it, right? It's one of the things where, obviously the links out of that page that's about music to other links on your website may not be as powerful, because it's one of the things where like there's a difference of relevancy there, and to have like a site about music linked to one about internet marketing, right? But in reality, it's not something where they look at it and say, well, you lose a couple of points because you've got one article about music. Like, again, that's not the way it works. And again, thankfully, that's not what it is, because then if you think about it, you've got organizations like news organizations where they've got a website about thousands of topics, right? And I'm not just even talking like, the minuscule amounts about, within the sports section, there's football and baseball. And I'm talking about the fact that like the difference between, politics and sports and entertainment and fashion and all these things like that would have their own little categories to it. And they're all radically different, right? So it's kind of like Google's not going to come in and say like, hey, you're not a very good political website because you've got fashion advice on there. Like, that's not the way I look at it. It's like nothing's dragging it out of that way. And so that's where it comes down on like on the content side of things. On the other one, specifically about like the way pages are constructed and things like that, is you mentioned site speed, and that's one of the examples I used in there. And that's another good example to where like, pages can come in at different site speeds, right? I mean, that's just something, if you think about it, is kind of like, of course it is. Like, there may be a base site speed level that comes with the template for the given page they're using stuff. But every time you add something to it, whether it's like this one's got a video on it, or this one's got a different image on it, or, this one's got multiple images on it, who knows what it is, right? Suddenly you're building on that, and you may have one page that is just heavier than another, right? And I've encountered this before, where different clients where you go like, why is this page so heavy? And like, why is this so heavy? And it's usually because somebody uploaded an image on there that is, like super high res. Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's something where like it just drags the whole thing down. And you go, oh, that makes sense. This is what this is. And like, you guys forgot to optimize this for the web or whatever it is. And suddenly it's big and heavy and screwing everything else up on that page specifically. But the entire website doesn't drag down because of it. Like it said, it's suddenly like there isn't a speed score for your entire website. It's one of the things like it doesn't even affect like the links from that page. Like when you link from that heavy page to another link, it doesn't go like, oh, and by the way, mark that other page down because we linked to them because this one's heavy. Like, it just doesn't think that way. It's one of the things where it just goes like, no, that page itself, we're gonna give that one a demerit because it's not loading fast and amongst other things to it, and that'll actually drag down its collective ability to rank really well because of its page speed and things like that. But it doesn't script the rest of your site because of that, right? And again, that's like a really thing. And oddly enough, that's one that nobody seems to really argue with too much, because I think it's because Google stated from the beginning that like this is called like a page speed score. Like, it's really, they said, it's about that page or whatever it is. It's not a collective type of thing to it. So I don't think, most people don't get into it. I think where a lot of the arguments come about for the web pages versus website thing actually have to do more with the concept of authority or basically the inbound links for it, or even internal linking to it. And that's usually where it is. And that's actually was my really big problem with the concept that it existed before, because there's a bunch of cottage industries, a bunch of little industries that have like popped up in the SEO world because of people, claiming that there is a domain level of authority that's on there, and it usually has to do with that. So you've got companies that are selling links. You've got companies that are selling, maybe it's things like guest posting services or things like that. People that are selling domain names themselves, right? All these different things that they use this metric as a way to convince you that like this is why you should buy it, because it has this high domain authority score, right? And it's something where we see it all the time. Even as a company that does SEO for a living, we still get our share of people writing us to do like guest posting or things like that, and they'll always sell us with the things. Hey, look, this has a very high domain authority. We got one the other day. Joe, our partner, and I like had a funny conversation about it because the guy claimed you can get us on Harvard.edu. right? You know, and it was something like, oh, we're going to put the space on it, and we're going like, oh, what a laugh, you know, like Harvard might have a great, you know, domain authority, whatever, but who cares? Like, even if it did, like, nobody within Harvard is going to like point to that page. And so that page isn't going to have any really juice on its own. Like, so even at its best, even if there was a domain authority, like how much could it possibly do for that one page of a guest post that nobody's linking to except maybe you? And you think that's going to make all the difference in the world, right?
All it's going to do is send you to the poorhouse buying links.
Well, that too. Yeah, exactly. So, and the crazy thing is like, I mean, if you really think about it, that's why it makes sense that these things don't affect you at all. Like you shouldn't live in a world where just the fact that you've got content that lives on a domain with a high domain authority should do better than anything else just by association, right? You know, it's like just because you show up and instantly you've got a page of content that is a completely horrible description of, say, like a recipe for something, when there's thousands of other people that are selling the same recipe or around town kind of stuff, and they're better at it. Maybe they describe it better, or maybe they, you know, the pictures are better, maybe it's better, or whatever it is. But like, just because it's on this site, it gets more points. No, that's not the way this works, right? That's not the kind of like democratic way that Google likes to think for these kinds of things, right? And so
Yes.
that's where it all kind of like falls apart on it, is that it's just like, no, it's just for that page. And there are things like there, I mean, there is a page level authority, and Moz and a lot of the other tools have their own you know, different metrics that they devised for page authority, and Google has specifically stated, it goes, yes, there is such a thing as page authority. Like, your one can't be perfect. You know, it's not going to be what ours is, because you came up with it and it's not ours and we didn't tell you what it was, right? But it's something where at the very least you say, look, you're on the right track. There is such a thing as a page authority for this one. And that's what, you know, that's what it's always, that's what PageRank was kind of associated with in the first place, when it had to do with the links and all that kind of stuff. But like, you don't get any points just because your content happens to live on a cool domain, right? Otherwise, like, I don't know. Another good example is, say, the website Medium, right? And which is like a big collection of content, that all that content is user generated, right? That content that is, you know, generated by different users of different levels and different things like that doesn't immediately do better because Medium does better. Like, it's like, you don't get any extra points because you live on the Medium domain. You get extra points because your content's fantastic, and because you got inbound links of your own that are relevant or whatever, and because the page itself is like optimized in the right way. So you still have to put in the effort for your page. You don't get to phone it in just because it lives on the Medium domain. So yeah, that's kind of like where it comes over. That's where it breaks things for people, but it really does break things, and it causes all kinds of arguments, and it just gets it gets really weird. You know, like, it's like people really want to hold on to this. It's really like you're really shattering them, or you know, maybe you're running in and telling them that God doesn't exist or something. But it's like, it goes, no, like, I'm not going to go down this hole with you. I'm just saying, this is something that, you know, that Google has said it multiple times. This is the way it works, and you know, like, you should believe them, because it's you know, not doing that is really goofing things up and making it hard for you from an SEO perspective.
I would think so.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that you mentioned in there that was interesting to me, because I think it helps also explain this a bit better to people that are struggling to still go with it, is they might kind of have the wrong frame of reference for the way in which your strength might be kind of categorized or signaled from Google. We have these phrases like on-page, off-page SEO, technical SEO, some of these things we've kind of talked about today, those sort of tactics. Are those three buckets good buckets? Or is there a better way to kind of bucket these tactics in a way that leads you more to correct SEO kind of evaluation for each page?
Yeah. So there are those terms obviously do exist. There's on-page and off-page SEO. There's another kind of way of looking at things from like technical SEO kind of way. I've never particularly had a lot of use for those terms. I think they don't define things very well, or they don't split things out as much. You know, for instance, on-page SEO tends to deal a lot with everything from the content itself to all the different little technical aspects that make up a page itself, which can include the HTML and a bunch of other things as well. And even then, SEOs can't, agree on that so much as far as what it is, because a lot of those things actually fall into the camp of technical SEO, which doesn't necessarily think about content, but does think about all the more technical aspects like the HTML and the page speed and the mobile friendliness and all those types of things as well. So you've got those two things that kind of compete with each other, but just one has more content, type of things involved in it. And then you've got off-page SEO, which is really just link building. Like there's, sometimes there's other things that are involved in there. Maybe it's citations, and what have you. But in reality, that's just everything that happens offside the page. And like I said, I'm not a big fan of that level of organization. I think it confuses people. So usually the way I talk about it, and I kind of split this up in the article, and this is also the way that we do our audits for the company and things like that, is this idea of 3 groups, which is content, website architecture, and inbound links. And sometimes inbound links, I call it authority, because that's really what we're talking about in that area. But those are the kind of 3 big areas. And obviously content is your content, right? It could be, your blog post, it could be your product descriptions, it could be your about us page, it could be all those kind of things. But basically anything that makes your content your content. Really, it's the whole reason you have a website in the first place is this information that you're sharing with the world, right? And that has its own rules and considerations and things like that about, worrying about like topicality and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of things that people have settled with content over there that actually don't matter. There's we was evaluating a new tool the other day that was talking about this stuff, and they bring up stuff like like readability scores, the Flesch or Kincaid scores, or word count, stuff like that. All things that actually just aren't actually ranking signals at all. Like it's not stuff that it's really looking into. Google doesn't care about these type of things. Google does care about quality and other things, but it has other ways to measure those types of things. And then website architecture is more along the lines of what most people call technical SEO. It's kind of in that same area for the most part. It's just a different way to look about it. And even the me calling it website architecture is kind of funny, because this whole argument about web pages and websites, but I do it because it's your website is usually designed with that type of mind, but it is that collective, talking about the container for all that great content and how you've put it together. And that includes everything from the navigation to the code, to mobile friendliness, to website speed, and all those kind of things. And then the last one is inbound links or authority. And again, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's basically just getting links from other relevant, high quality sources back to your site, hopefully through public relations type means, or other approved link building type of methodologies, whether it be classic outreach or doing things like fixing shallow links or what have you. So it's these things kind of like are nice big 3 groups, and I think it really helps explain things a lot better. And certainly when I'm teaching at UCLA, when I teach my students this kind of stuff, they can certainly wrap their brains around who this kind of, like, oh, I know this, and it also kind of speaks the idea from a, I guess, a responsibility level about who's in charge of these different buckets. And it becomes a matter of like, oh, content is for the content team, people that actually create this content, that's their responsibility. And they have this job. And if they're, if they thought of themselves as just a copywriter before, we try and update their skill set. So it's kind of like, hey, great, but you're a copywriter in the age of search engines. So you have to take that into account in your writing now. That's just kind of it works. And the website designer team obviously takes place of the website architecture. That's kind of their responsibility for all these kinds of things. And that one's not too much of a leap for most people, but even then there were still plenty of website designers that still consider SEO out of their purview. It's kind of like, hey, look, I show up and I make it look pretty, and that's as far as I
do
get.
That stuff later.
Yeah, exactly. You fix this stuff later. Let me know what's busted, and I'll go and fix it for you. But in reality, I've always said that, like, hey, look, if that team knew about SEO from the get-go, then they'd embrace it from the get-go, and you wouldn't have to fix this stuff later. It'd just be a matter of like, hey, we're just going to make it right the first time and move on. The tons of people like to really fight me on that one. Like they go, well, I just don't see it happen, so it must not be possible. I go, I don't think it's not that it's not possible. I think we've I think SEOs have just done a really bad job over the years of kind of going like, well, this is all my stuff. These are all my things and only I know about them and only I can tell you like how to fix them. So just ignore it until later on. And while some SEOs make a good job about the idea of like, hey, look, we should really go arm in arm with the website development team during like something like a website redesign. In my opinion, it would just be better if the website designers just knew how to do it themselves, right? And just, right out of the gate. I don't know why this is so earth shattering, but
Wouldn't that be great?
yeah, it's the way it should work, right? And they're only going to do that if we start upgrading their skill sets as well. And then the inbound link, inbound links to me have always been public relations, right? And that's just a matter of making sure your publicists know that like, hey, look, in modern public relations, links are generated. Links happen. People are writing on websites now. They're going to link over to hopefully you can train them a little bit to say, hey, link to specific content or link to a specific product page or whatever. And not everything goes to the homepage. And usually, that's usually the easiest one to kind of upgrade sensibilities wise. They go like, oh, I can get that. I'll make sure and do this. And this is the page you should really link to and everything's fine. Usually, I guess on the publicist side, I really wish sometimes they would learn that there are all these new tools out there that link builders have invented, right? For themselves as far as like ways of looking, about other pages that are about your topic and things like that that could really work. Because then they would go like, oh, that would be useful to me too, because that actually shows that this person writes about this subject or this whatever, and you can find these things out, and it would make their job of traditional PR style outreach better, right? And
yes.
Yeah, there is a new, I've seen the word digital PR start to start to crop up a lot more in certain things. And there was an article, I think it was earlier this week or last week, where they talked about how like Google's John Mueller kind of endorsed it. And in reality, it wasn't really an endorsement. It was basically saying like, yeah, this is good. That's the way you should be doing this kind of stuff, is that you should definitely be treating, your best link building should be public relations. That's just something I've been saying forever now, but and steering yourself away from some of the shiftier, types of link building methodologies that have popped up over the years. But even then, some of those have certainly got their merits on how they operate. I think it's, again, something that the publicity team should just kind of like incorporate in their daily to-do list. And maybe that's the bigger problem is that, I'm basically telling all these different people that like, hey, this is your part of your job now. Like you need to upgrade yourself, and this is the way it works. And eventually that won't be a problem. You'll have a couple of generations here where, every modern PR people will go, oh, of course, I'm going to do that with links. And website designers will say, of course, I need to optimize for speed and mobile friendliness, and things like that. But for now, we're still in this kind of squishy transition period where, you've still got people that are calling themselves like SEOs that outside of it, or people that are saying, hey, I'm an SEO copywriter. I said, you're just a copywriter. You're just this, like it doesn't have to be something separate. It's just these things, but we're still in between here and will be for like years. I don't know when this will all flip over, but it will someday. But.
Well, speaking of architecture, there's one sort of interesting debate you mentioned in your article. That is subdomains versus subdirectories.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an opinion on that?
Sure. It's funny, like my opinion on it doesn't matter so much, but it's something that Google has specifically stated like over and over again. Yeah, Google has specifically said like, it doesn't matter. Like it's something where like, it seems to, it comes up every couple of years, somebody like props that one back up to the service and says like, hey, what's the difference? Is this better? Is whatever. And it just doesn't matter. Like Google specifically said, it doesn't matter. And I think some of this confusion goes back quite a long way back, unfortunately, was back when Matt Cutts was still at Google, who used to be, he was kind of John Mueller before John Mueller and things like that. But he was really the voice of organic search for Google for a very, very long time. Super nice guy. But I think there was an instance where he brought up the concept of subdomains. And I think it was originally around the time when like the Panda update came out where they were focusing on content. And I think he had suggested to somebody about this concept of if you had weak content that was on your website, that you could technically push it over onto a subdomain and that would help things a bit, right? And that obviously, like, I think that broke a lot of people, and it's probably one of the reasons why we're still having this argument over websites, over web pages kind of things, is that that makes it sound like this little pocket domain that you've got in here, is treated differently in the world of things. And I haven't heard any at Google say anything like that about separating that data off since then. Like, I haven't heard it come up again. So it's maybe one of those things where maybe it was true for a little bit and it isn't true anymore, but it isn't certainly something that anybody pushes, because now if you ask Google about, if you talk about subdomains versus subfolders, they'll go like, it doesn't matter. Do whatever makes the most sense for you and your overall site design, and it's fine, right? And once again, the fact that they keep saying that again is another point of proof for me for the fact that it's web pages and not websites, because it just doesn't matter. Like they kind of prove themselves out as far as this theories go. But
another thing that you mentioned there in the article too was these sort of content pillars, content hubs, and that you can create pillar topics, and we get a lot of questions about this from our clients. Can they create these pillar topics around certain subjects with links to other subpages? It seems to have an SEO effect. Why does that work? Yeah. And how can this theory still be true, and why would that work?
Right. So what ends up happening when you do the kind of hub pillar thing is the idea that maybe you write one subject that is a little bit more broad. Maybe it's about an entire thing, right? And it's a bigger, larger subject to it that begs for supplemental type of material, right? There's clearly a lot of subtopics that could branch from that one big topic. One good example on our website is we've got a page on there that's how search engines work, right? And that is a big meaty article that I wrote that kind of like takes you through all the pieces of how a search engine works, specifically how SEO and its algorithms work and things like that. And it was really designed to be a hub of everything, with the idea that later on we'll update that hub page and link out to other content that could specifically about things like maybe optimizing for mobile, or specifically about optimizing for site speed, or specifically optimizing content or things like that. So you could break all these things off. Excuse me. And that's kind of this idea for it. And the thing is that the way this works from a content perspective is that you've got one topic right in the middle of it, one big meaty topic in the middle of it, that when you link to those other topics, there's a kind of an implied endorsement from a topic level to it, right? So there's no greater like website authority to it, and there's no topicality authority to it. But it's the idea that page is on its own usually gets recognized for being an authority on a given topic, right? And it does that through a variety of different ways. One, the content itself might be well written and actually talks about a subject in great depth. With the possibility of splitting off, but then usually it gets linked to a lot because it is a more broad topic, right? And that's usually the way it is. So once you write that hub thing, you kind of say, hey, everybody link to this one. This is about this subject, whatever it is. And what it is all those inbound links all focus on that hub page, and then that hub page links to all those other subtopics and spreads the wealth of all that authority out to your lower pages, right? So, and those lower pages themselves can get their own links. Obviously, they can be linked to from outside sources. You don't necessarily have to restrict that from a concept-wise, but the idea is that you've got one hub that is probably going to have more authority than anything else that spreads out. And I certainly didn't come up with this methodology. I believe HubSpot was the first one that actually was writing about it quite a bit when they came up with it. But there's many others that have claimed, that said, well, this is a concept that I've worked on before and it's around. So I don't think anybody really owns it. It's probably something everybody came up together. But in reality, the whole reason that works is because websites were, web pages, it's web pages and not websites, right? It's the idea that like those individual web pages are their own little microcosms of information that can influence other things around them, right? But it's not doing it necessarily on a website level, right? And the funny thing is that one of the biggest hubs and pillar kind of things that's in your website is your homepage itself, right? And that one almost happens accidentally. That's something because, who knows, just laziness or whatever it is on a lot of people's parts. But, like when people talk about your company in general, they'll link to their homepage because why not? That's the way it should work, right? But it can actually happen accidentally too. So say if you're like a Nike, and you've got a brand new pair of kicks that just came out, whatever it is, there are going to be some reviewers that link right to the the specific product page for that new pair of shoes, whatever it is. But a lot of people aren't that good, and they're just going to link to the homepage, right? And the good news is that you can siphon some of that authority off by linking to that new shoe from your homepage as well, and it'll pass that information along. But it's one of the things where kind of like how trickle economics doesn't work, right? It's one of the things where the people that are lower down from that page don't get as much as people think they should, so it's something where it's a good way to do it. You should definitely link to as much of your content from your homepage as you can that makes sense without being spammy about it, because it does share the wealth of your homepage. But it's one of the things where it just kind of like proves the point that it has to be a web page, that your homepage itself is a web page. And even though it's the entry page for it, it's still just a web page, right? And it's a web page that shares information, and it artificially kind of gooses its overall page authority because so many people pay attention to it. But the reason why a lot of times some of your sub pages or like your content pages or your blog post or your product pages and things don't do as well, and you're wondering like why they aren't doing as well, is because it's web pages and not websites, right? And it's one of the things where like you could say all day like, hey, we just put this new product page up, and our domain authority is fantastic, whatever it is. Why isn't that page doing fantastic on its own? And it's going, well, because you're not linking to it yet. Like you don't have any inbound links to that specific page, right? Maybe you've got one internally that is propping that up a little bit, but like it's not doing it, right? And that's the kind of the way this stuff has to work is these pages have to get their own inbound links. They have to do everything else right on their own. There's no help from mom and dad, I guess, is outside of maybe a link from the homepage on that one, but it's not something where there's no such thing as a web page being born into money, I guess, in that concept, right? Like it's something where they're going to have to work. Yeah, they're going to have to work for it on their own. So.
Well, I guess I can't stump you. I mean, I have to admit that it seems like in 99% of the cases, at least, Google is ranking web pages, not websites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So why should this be controversial? Why do some SEO pros, tool makers kind of hate this innocent phrase when it just seems so simple? It makes such sense.
So, I mean, there's a couple of reasons, and some of it is out of confusion, and because I guess you can kind of blame Google a little bit for this, because they've had instances in the past where they have said things to where sometimes they will look at a collection of pages, or sometimes they will look at an entire domain or things like that. But that sometimes is kind of like the big important word in there, because it's not something that it happens all the time. So it's like sometimes we have to do this because we're looking at things on a greater scale, but it's not something we do all the time, right? And that's just kind of like the heart of it. But because they say it happens at some point, whatever it is, it's really easy to make the jump to say like, well, then there must be like a holistic kind of metric to chase down for this type of a thing. So that causes that confusion. The other type of thing is that there are, it's really embedded in the SEO culture, right? You've got a lot of tools that have come up with things like domain authority or URL authority, or any of these things that they've come up with the years, claiming that this is a holistic measurement of the authority of your website or whatever it is. And it's hard to back out of that, right? It's something like as a company, they're very well invested in that. There's no way they're going to come back later on and say, we goofed up. That's not the way this works, and we can't do it. There's no backing out of it at this point. Because I think
the IPO.
Yeah, exactly. I think it would break the company, right? It's something where they're going like, well, then everything else is a lie. Why should we trust you? Because you've been selling this the whole time, right? And the funny thing is I can't entirely blame them, right? Because there are tons of smart people at Moz, right? Dr. Pete is one of my favorite people to read. He is an incredibly intelligent person. All the other data scientists and things like that were over at Moz that came up with that, and they made a big decision at one point where, when they're trying to figure out all the individual aspects of why a page ranks for something, right, what it is, and there was something missing. There was something that there was a missing element there that they couldn't really put their hands on, right? And hypothesis that they made from this one was the idea that like there must be a domain level event, right? A domain level metric that is guiding these things, because we can't figure out why one page does better than another page when on the surface they're practically the same, right? And like it doesn't make any sense with this kind of stuff. And I think what that difference is as I've discussed is that concept of emergence, where like things being greater than some of their parts. But it could also just be the concept that there are so many factors, right? People used to say that like, Google has too many, like 200 ranking signals. It's probably thousands, right? At this point, it's a lot of different factors to it, and they all work together. And as we've kind of discussed before, it's not like Google scores these individual things and then adds them up. It scores them up and then multiplies them. Right. And so that means that if you're really good at something else, it can raise you up. But if you're really bad at something, it'll drag you down. Right. And it'll pull you back in there. And it's because, we're not dealing with whole numbers all the time. If you've got a fractional score on something, it's like, maybe you got a 1, for your page speed, which is, counted as 100. Right. But then maybe you got, like a 0.1 for mobile friendliness, or a 0.1 for something else like that. It's going to make everything else look bad and drag it back. And I think that concept of multiplying versus addition when it comes to all these factors is something that I don't think is really taken into account, because I think everybody wants it to be an add 'em up kind of thing. I want everybody to, like, it goes, oh, these are all my scores and they all add up, and my rank becomes this because that. But it's because it's actually a multiplication. I think that skews the way that everybody looks at things, where they think they should be doing a lot better, because they go like, well, look at this, like, so my page isn't as fast. Like, it goes, who cares, right? That should be a big deal. It's just there, right? And it's not the way people's mind works, right? They can't understand the idea that saying like, hey, look, I did good at everything else, why am I getting penalized for this? And it goes, because that's the way it works, right? Like that's the way that Google in its wisdom decided that all these things have to play together, is that it's a multiplicative type of factor rather than an additive one.
It's really, it's just so interesting the way all these factors work together.
Mm-hmm.
And we've touched on a lot of different topics here. I guess my final thing would just be, sitting in the CMO's seat, how would they go about evaluating their agency's SEO based upon what we just kind of learned? You talked about maybe rebucketing their tactics in a way that makes more sort of mental sense, kind of abandoning some of these metrics that don't make any sense, abandoning some tools that aren't really giving signals that you really care about. What else do you think would be just worthy of just reminding people is just the center of what they really should be caring about?
Yeah, I mean, so the way I've looked at SEO for like probably the last 10, 15 years is this idea that modern SEO, the modern way that search engines work, is really, a repackaged collection of tactics from marketing, website design, and public relations that any self-respecting company of the 21st century should be doing anyway, even if search engines didn't exist, right? Like these are the table stakes for having a website or having a company, that you should be doing things, right? If you're bothering to have a website, your whole job should be creating amazing content. The website should be built properly, fast loading, mobile friendly, all these things to it. And you're going to want to get links from the outside sources, because that's what the web is a web of information that's all tied together, right? This is what being a website is all about. And Google judges you on how well you do that collection of things. Right. And I think if you think of things that way, rather than looking at it as SEO as some, voodoo like force that is pushing you in one direction or the other based on these things, to where, you've got a wizard conjuring magic and saying these things will all come together and we'll do this stuff. And like, if you look at it from the standpoint of like, hey, look, this is just modern marketing and Google is judging you on how well you're doing all these things that you should be doing anyway, right? Then I think it takes away a lot of the sheen of SEO, which is another reason why SEOs like hate it when I describe it that way, because it was a lot more powerful when SEOs could say like, only I can do this, right? And mere mortals couldn't understand this. Only an SEO could come in and actually fix these things. And in reality, like SEOs, do have a certain amount of power because they've got a greater understanding of how all these things fit together and how they work, and their importance in the world is going to be important for a very long time, because people still think this way. They still, they don't completely understand how search engines work and how it all fits together. So, they're going to have a job forever, no matter how many times I say that this is the way it looks at it. But that said, if you're a big enterprise company, like some of the ones we worked with, like Sony or like the Smithsonian or whatever it is, where you've got the people, right? If you've got the people power to make these things happen, you've got your content creators, you've got your website design team, you've got your publicists, all these people that are there and ready to work, whatever it is. And instead you look at it from the standpoint of like, let's upgrade their skill sets to a more modern way of looking at things, then you've got it, right? And in our case, like we guide people down that path. That's one of the things we've done for multiple companies now, and something that's very useful. Sure, there's plenty of times where we obviously do it the other way, where we've got smaller companies that don't have those resources that need help in the things, and we can certainly provide that help when it comes to content or website changes or link building and things like that. But for the most part, like there is a way to do this, and even those companies that are on the smaller side of it, if they look at it from the standpoint of saying like, oh, I get it. I get it. These things need to get done. We need to be doing these things, and we need to be doing them better. Then I think it's something where their life gets easier. Their understanding of all this stuff gets better. Maybe they're going to get less taken advantage of by less scrupulous SEOs that are out there that want to make it sound like only they can do this kind of stuff. And I think it's going to be like better. But
we shall see. It would one day at a time, one client at a time. One website at a time.
Absolutely.
Well, Jeff, this is just a ton of great information today. I encourage everybody, there's a link with this article, with this podcast, to the Search Engine Journal in this particular article. Also encourage you to go on Twitter and search us up, or just search us under the web pages, not websites, in Google, and pull up some of the discussion about this. It's really interesting what's happening. But thank you for joining us today at our special Amplitude digital podcast, our Search Engine Journal Director's Cut edition. And Jeff, thank you so much for your time and expertise today.
My pleasure, as always.
So please stay in touch with us at amplitudedigital.com, and stay tuned for more episodes of the Amplitude Digital E-commerce podcast.